Hello again everyone. At the time of me saying these words to you, there aren't really any native ultra-wide angle lenses for Canon's new APS-C mirrorless RF mount cameras. After all, they've only just started to come out, so I thought it might be fun to retest some of their well-regarded EFS ultra-wide angle lenses using an adapter to see how well they work on a very high-resolution EOS R7 camera. First up, the venerable Canon EOS 10-22mm f3.5-4.5 USM. It came out all the way back in 2004, so it's nearly 20 years old now, and yet it's always had a pretty solid, if not spectacular, reputation. I have to try not to be too biased in this review actually, because I have incredibly fond memories of this lens. I first bought one of these when I was learning about photography while living in South Korea about 13 years ago, and I managed to get some beautiful pictures on my various travels, even taking it to Arizona for a trip to the Grand Canyon one time. Those ultra-wide angles were something I never even knew existed at the time, so experimenting with this bad boy had me joyfully pirouetting back to my camera again and again. The zoom range of 10-22mm is the full frame equivalent of 16-35, so that's nice and versatile for any wide angle use, and the aperture brightness of f3.5-4.5 is, well, okay. Probably the most interesting thing about this lens now is that there are plenty of good copies available on eBay for only about $200 or even less. You can still get new copies of it today, but they will set you back about $600. This copy of the lens is in excellent condition, and I got it for only £120. The build quality of the lens is still fine today, with all the hallmarks of a classic mid-range Canon optic. It has a metallic lens mount, but no weather sealing. At the rear there's a useful auto manual focus switch, plus an old school focus ring, which is mechanically connected to the focus system. However, the ring turns smoothly and works on a clutch, so you can turn it any time, and even beyond the minimum and maximum focus distances. When you're zoomed in, the lens displays a little focus breathing. Zoom out, and that turns into some warping in the image corners. Not a serious issue for most video makers though, unless you're doing some absolutely crazy wide-angle focus pulling in your videos for some reason. The lens's ring USM autofocus may be a little old hat nowadays, but it still works quickly, quietly, and accurately. Then comes the lens's zoom ring. It's rubberized and turns lovely and smoothly, with barely any stickiness to it at all. The lens comes with the usual front and rear caps, although you'll have to buy a lens hood separately if you want one of those. It has a filter thread size of 77mm, which is very useful, although you'll want to mount only quite thin filters onto it in case of vignetting in the image corners. I should mention that this lens does not feature its own image stabilization, although the in-body stabilization of my Canon EOS R7 camera worked really well with it, and also the R7 had no issues with in-camera corrections or anything like that. They all worked straight out of the gate. Overall, the build quality of this lens is still seriously lovely 19 years after its release, and the ultrasonic focus system hasn't lost its charm after all this time. Alright, let's take a look at image quality now. As I've already mentioned, this is a really old lens. It came out at the same time as Canon's old 20D digital SLR camera, whose 8-megapixel APS-C sized sensor was considered a flagship offering at the time. How on earth will the lens cope with a camera of 4 times that resolution, a 32.5 megapixel EOS R7? Well, let's take a look. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. At 10mm and f3.5, sharpness is reasonably good in the middle of your images, but not brilliantly so. Corner image quality is a little softer, with lower contrast, but it's not dreadfully bad by any means. Stop down to f5.6 and those corners look just a little sharper and punchier. Stop down to f8 or f11 and softness is already beginning to emerge due to the effect of diffraction. Okay, so the widest angle looks alright. Let's zoom in and take a look at things at 22mm. At f4.5, sharpness and contrast look very nice in the middle, a bit better than at 10mm. However, the image corners now look noticeably soft. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 for slight improvements that lead to the corners looking, well, just a little better, although stop down to f11 for a small extra boost in contrast. Overall, well, it's not a great performance here. The lens is absolutely incapable of resolving 32 megapixels of detail, but its image quality is by no means bad. You can still get decent enough pictures here and details if you don't want to crop in too far or print too big. Okay, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. This lens always had a great reputation in this regard, and at 10mm we do indeed see surprisingly little distortion. Nice! The vignetting at f3.5 is pretty gnarly though. Stop down to f5.6 for those corners to brighten up a little. Zoom in to 22mm for only negligible pincushion distortion, but again, dark corners at the brightest aperture. At f5.6 and f8, those corners brighten up again, so it's clear that distortion correction was a major priority for Canon here at the time, perhaps even at the expense of image resolution, which makes sense in the days of Canon cameras being lower resolution but unable to automatically correct distortion. Well, let's see about close-up image quality. The lens's minimum focus distance of 24cm lets you get nice and close to smaller subjects here. Close-up image quality is a little softer than at normal distances, and even stopped down to f8, we don't see any improvement. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. At 10mm, we do see some broad flaring effects, actually, that lower your contrast, but they're not too opaque at least. At 22mm, the situation is about the same. And how about coma smearing? At f3.5 there's a little smearing on bright points of light to be seen here, but it's reduced at f5.6. Let's zoom out and look for sunstars now. They emerge in a small way at f11. They get a touch stronger at f16 and at f22, but they're never very impressive. When it comes to out of focus backgrounds, well, simply by the wide angle nature of this lens, they are very difficult to get here. However, get close enough to your subject and the resulting blurry backgrounds look reasonably soft. Overall, the Canon EOS 10-22 is still a really nice, fun lens to use. Its parameters and build quality are lovely, its image quality never bad. I wouldn't really recommend it for stills photography on an EOS R7 because it isn't really sharp enough to satisfy that hungry 32 megapixel sensor, but it will be good for 4K video work, and it'll also be a nice option for the lower resolution EOS R10 camera. Well, if you don't mind a lack of image stabilization, that is. Oh man, I enjoyed revisiting this lens. It's been sitting in front of me on my desk the whole time I was writing this review and for a few days before that, just bringing back happy memories for me of South Korea and generally making me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And you know what could make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, other than getting this lens for £120, that is? Supporting this channel on Patreon, of course. My supporters make a huge difference to me keeping this channel going, and they get all kinds of exclusive bonus content thrown into the mix also. Check it out in the description below, and ciao for now.